Yeah, there's quite the article in the newspaper today on Blash.
Oh, there is. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Good thing.
Just never ends with them, does it?
No.
Pain in the ass.
All right, that's all good.
Good morning.
Morning, folks.
Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Hey, Kurt.
Good.
Morning.
I don't know why I have to change my settings every single time I come in. It's supposed to keep your settings, but anyway. How is everybody?
Good.
Good.
Good. Good.
I was reading all kinds of pandemic COVID type jokes this morning. And one of them was that when you're going to a Zoom meeting now, you have to decide if you're going to wear your regular pajamas or you're going to wear your business pajamas. And the other one was today is Blur's Day, the 19th day of April, because we are all losing track of time.
Right.
Oh my gosh. So we're waiting for at least one more, either John or Fred. Both of them said they'd make it.
Hey, Kurt, I'm just thinking ahead here about sharing my screen, and for some reason I'm getting a weird message here. This is bizarre.
Maybe Hillary might have to make you a
Oh, yeah.
presenter in order to do that.
Oh, wait a minute. Maybe this is.
Good morning.
Hey,
Good morning,
Hillary.
Hillary.
Let me see here. I have it. It is allowing participants to share their screen.
Yeah, and I see that. And I've had this issue once before. When I try to do that, I get a little thing saying desktop, but it has a little triangle with an exclamation point. But of course, no description as to what that exclamation
Sounds
point
angry.
Yeah, it sounds angry. Exactly. That was my interpretation. You know what I might do is, just in case, email these slides to Kurt and Hillary.
If you email them, I'm still letting folks in. I'm also trying to schedule something up with Chris Bates. So if you email the slides to me, I can try and share my screen.
Yep.
If that's helpful. But maybe Kurt, if you could too, so you could move them along if I'm engaged in conversation over here.
I'll send it
Sure.
to both you guys. Give me just a minute here, just in
Yeah.
case.
Catch you later.
Oh.
You got.
Let me
You're-
tally up and I'll.
You're juggling.
Now, this is a good sized file, so you're going to have to get it from mail drop, probably. Make life a little more complicated. I just sent it. And I'm going to sign out and sign back in too, just to see if that makes a difference on sharing screen.
Okay.
Okay, I'm waiting to receive it.
Since we have a quorum, at least I'll call the meeting to order at 9:05. Thank you, Fred.
Yeah, I was having trouble getting on. I'm not quite sure why. I dialed in. I did a bunch of different things, but now I'm on.
Today's one of those days where it must be sunspots, tech interference.
Solar winds.
Solar winds, some kind of winds.
I kid you not.
So anyway, we're waiting for Scott's slides to come through so that hopefully somebody can display them. What I'm going to do with the agenda is, since we have Kathleen and Gary and some folks from Elaine, it looks like, Olga, some folks who are interested in 95 Lawrence Road, we'll probably take that out of order so they don't have to sit through an extensive discussion of responsible management entity.
All right, let me just see if this is gonna work and then you can carry on. All right, we there?
Yeah.
Okay,
Beautiful. Is that
okay.
what-
This is what Scott wanted, but I can go ahead and stop sharing and just give the word when we're ready. So there you go.
Okay. So I'm going to wait for Scott to jump back in because he actually has his hand on the pulse of what's going on with the Bowler report, final iteration on that. And of course, my wife's in the background on her meetings.
That's why we invested in this screen I have behind me. Try to keep things quiet.
All right, here's Scott. Okay, I think we're there.
Terrific.
Back
So
again.
Scott, what I mentioned while you were away is we'll take the agenda a little bit out of order, and since we've got folks from the housing group here to start with 95 Lawrence Road, so they don't have to sit through the RME discussion. And I mentioned that you had your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the final iteration of the Bowler report. A couple of the key items from our last discussion was how we can integrate that into the RFP. I know Gary they're probably very close to or about ready to pull the trigger on their RFP. So we had some homework items in order to have that mesh with their schedule.
Yeah.
So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to you, Scott.
Sure. So I've had a couple of good discussions with David Formato at On-Site Engineering, who I think was a subcontractor to Bowler on the project. And he has, is finalizing the report. Maybe just to take one step back, we collaborated with David and Tim Passakarnis at the Cape Cod Commission on the nitrogen loading calculations and the cost calculations. In fact, we all did our own calculations independently, and thankfully they all came up with similar results. So we then got together and talked about some of the assumptions, and David made some final decisions on how they were going to present in his report. And he's done that. And I don't know whether the report's made it back to the town or not, but he did share a draft with me and with Tim at the Cape Cod Commission. And we signed off on that last week, I think. And that report, it still suggests that the findings are similar to what we talked about before. And that is that the larger so-called neighborhood project looks to be pretty cost effective compared to the go it alone option. And the report will show a range of nitrogen removal benefits, because as we all know, there's assumptions that go into that in terms of what the starting concentrations are and what the actual effluent will look like with the treatment plant. And he's also incorporated costs and calculated it on $1 per kilogram basis. And under the best assumptions, it looked like it was down in the $100 to $200 per kilogram range, which was pretty cost effective for the larger project. He did calculate, as they did in the original report, 3 scenarios: the housing project alone, the housing project with the 3 municipal facilities, and then with all of that and some neighborhood homes up to around, I think the top flow is around 30,000 gallons per day. So all 3 of those options are outlined in his report. And beyond that, I don't want to steal his thunder. The report will say what it says, but it should be in your hands soon if you don't already have it. And then the last part of what you asked about, Kurt, I did speak with, I started speaking with him and others about what the town share might be going forward, because I certainly recall and am sensitive to the fact that the housing committee doesn't want to unduly overburden the developer. So we thought that one of the initial costs would be the groundwater discharge permit, which is required for the treatment plant. And that cost, my estimate on that is probably in the $125,000 range in terms of the work that needs to be done. So so-called hydrogeologic report, and then the preliminary design of the treatment plant for DEP. So that would be a cost that arguably the developer may not need to have before them if they were to go alone. Although, as you correctly pointed out, Kurt, I think it was you, they would have permitting costs. So perhaps the right number is the groundwater discharge permit cost. Let's call that $125,000 minus whatever they would have cost to do their own permit. And I don't know what that number is. That may be something that David Formato could generate. But that's kind of where we're at in terms of report status, and then maybe some preliminary costs for the town.
So,
Hi. Hi.
so there's a couple of things, Scott, that, obviously from Gary's standpoint, he's looking for language for their RFP.
Yep.
So I think that's one thing would be, specifically what kind of language, can Bowler produce for them to include in the RFP to specify all this.
Yep.
The second thing in my mind is, we've got to, how do we, I guess if we come up with, if the Cape Cod Commission or somebody, Bowler Commission, effectively what we've got to do is figure out what would be an appropriate cost share for the developer to begin with, right?
Right.
Because they do have a cost there. And then the town would be kicking in the balance. So just figuring out some kind of reasonable cost share to arbitrate that. Gary, I don't know how you feel about, what the best way to go about that might be. Obviously, we want to be fair to the developer and have a correct number or reasonable number for town meeting.
So perhaps I should defer to Elaine, who's on the call now, and she's really the chair of the 95 Lawrence Task Force. So Elaine, if you want to take it, or I can respond.
I'm happy for you to.
So yeah, I guess you rightly point out, Kurt, that just to give you a perspective, is that we were waiting on three things. One was the land agreement, the other was a lease agreement, and the third was the wastewater. And we have the other two now in hand. So we are ready to issue this whenever we resolve the wastewater question. I have a broader question, which is, I thought that we were proposing that this was a town operated and funded wastewater system that the developer would be contributing / funding in part, certainly to meet all the costs associated with the housing. Is that still the concept that you have?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. That's the thing that makes the most sense.
Right. And it certainly, if it's beyond the housing project that we're trying to meet. So I think then that in terms of answering your question, if you can give us the language of what do you want from the developer in terms of this that we can embed into the RFP, we can see to the degree we get responses, whether it's prohibitive or not. But again, we're very sensitive to not overburdening the costs on the developer that makes the overall project of delivering affordable homes not viable.
Right. The challenge, I think, and one of the shifts probably for the developer or anybody else considering this project is, given Hillary's and Scott's earlier comments, it looks like the project's going to require advanced treatment no matter what. So we're kind of stuck. I mean, that's a DEP requirement. It's not something that, the wastewater committee or anybody else is trying to impose on the project, but it looks like that's a threshold that we have to meet no matter what.
Is that based upon the Duck Creek situation or on some other?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Two things. One is the Duck Creek situation, that it is a contributor to that watershed. The other is that DEP is expected to declare Wellfleet Harbor nitrogen sensitive, and therefore not allow any new additions of nitrogen to the watershed, which is a pretty heavy lift. So we've obviously got to show, either net neutral or reductions going forward.
I don't want to speak for the whole committee, but we're totally in sync with doing what we need to do in order to protect the water resources. So
Right.
in no way are we oppositional to this. I would tell you that we sized the project initially, and the maximum number of bedrooms was based upon not requiring a wastewater treatment system.
Right.
So, and that's been our focus and our discussion all along. But if we're required for other reasons to do that, then, we'll certainly do that.
I think the initial sizing consideration had to do with, correct me if I'm wrong, not tripping a development of regional impact, right?
We actually had an engineering report that gave us the maximum, and it was based upon not having to go for a permit for wastewater. If my understanding is correct. Elaine, I don't know if you want to jump
Yeah,
in.
that was the trigger. I mean,
Right.
So yeah,
And
so let me amplify on that. I don't want to cut you off, Elaine, but I want this to be clear to the committee, and the fact that we're looking at doing a groundwater discharge permit anyway. I think that removes the cap.
it
We're
does.
not in that box anymore. So, I don't want to upset the apple cart in terms of what you're thinking about, but I don't think you have a ceiling on the number of units any longer. I think we can start to talk about whether that ceiling makes sense or doesn't make sense, but it's certainly no longer a wastewater ceiling.
That's correct, right.
Kurt, if I could jump in on a couple things here. First of all, just for clarity, the language, which I know you need for the RFP, correct me if I'm wrong, but I presume that is coming from David Formato as part of his scope. I'm recalling that when Hillary asked me to look at the scope way back when, I think that's in part of what he's doing. I mean, if not, I'm happy to help with it, but I don't want to duplicate. And I think David's in a better position to do that. So I just want to make sure that people are not expecting something from somebody who's not expecting to give it. So does anybody know if that's the case, that David's, and I can ask him, I've got a call into him now on other matters, but does anybody here know if that's part of what he's going to be providing? That language that you're asking for?
Hillary had mentioned previously that it was part of an addendum to
Yes.
the Bowler scope.
Yep.
So it was specifically requested and budgeted for.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. And the second point is, actually I had 3 points. So that's the first one. The second one is the cost share. I'm presuming that we want an equitable cost share between the town and the developer. And as you're suggesting, Kurt, if this project was to go it alone at less than 10,000 gallons per day, the original scope, there would have been some permitting and design costs for the wastewater. And that's what I was suggesting earlier, that perhaps David could also estimate that, because if there's going to be some sort of simple algebraic formula to figure out the cost share, I guess that algebra in my mind would be the total cost of the treatment plant, A minus B, which would have been the cost to the developer, equals C. I don't know if that's something the town wants to go down that path or not, whether they want to pay for the whole thing, but David and I could talk about that if in fact you want that.
Kathleen?
Yeah, Kurt, I'm just gonna interrupt here and say that I think the task force had planned on the developer coming up with his share of the system that we have in the RFP. That would include the permitting. So we're not expecting the developer to get off the hook entirely. We're asking the developer to come up with the system that we had originally planned for our RFP. Having said that, the town is really the beneficiary of this wastewater treatment system. It will give us credit towards the 208 watershed plan. And so my thinking is the town is going to be responsible to share the, the burden of this cost. But that we'll discuss this at a task force meeting. I've got 3 questions. I'll make them brief. Scott, you mentioned that there are 3 scenarios for the system. Originally, it was presented to the task force as an A, B, and C, but I think what we were looking at or hoping to look at would be a modular build so that we
Yes.
could just start with the housing first and then build out from there. Can't give you a positive feedback on this, but it's been our experience with the water expansion in town that people homeowners may be reluctant to, tie into a treatment system at bearing the cost. So I'm in favor of, staying with that modular build and, having the housing go it alone, and then we can build out from there. But my next big question is the design and siting of this treatment plant. I have no idea what one looks like. We were slating to have it under the ball field. We thought that was a perfect site for this. Is that still going to work?
Yeah, I think, as I recall, the original Bowler report did show a series of plans, site plans, where in each of those 3 scenarios where it would go. And I think my recollection is there's adequate space, as you're suggesting. I think the leach field was proposed underneath the ball field. The size of these treatment buildings at this scale is sort of amazingly, to me, small from what most people think of these huge municipal city treatment plants like Deer Island, to use an extreme example. But what we're seeing is, some of these newer plants in the range we're talking about look like, in fact, I'm thinking of a developer we worked for in Bourne. He put the treatment plant in the pool, the swimming pool maintenance building. So they're pretty compact, but I would again defer to Bowler. I think they did provide some site plan pictures of where it might go under each scenario. And again, we could ask David Formato, but I'm pretty sure those are still valid. And I do agree with your first comment about the modular too. I think everybody's on the same page there, Kathleen.
Right. With regard to siting the treatment plant itself, the mechanics of it, I'm told by residents in Provincetown who live close to this treatment plant there, that it's often very noisy. And we're trying to create a residential neighborhood for 46 units of housing. And we're going for density, on a small part of this acreage. So citing this with regard to the RFP and putting it out there, we really need to nail it down.
Yeah, that's a
Kathleen,
good point.
let me just in terms of the Provincetown analogy, I think that's it. Provincetown system would probably be something like, just trying to do the math in my head, but it's probably about 20 times or 30 or 40 times larger than what we're talking about here.
Okay.
So in terms of odor and noise and those kind of things, I don't think that's going to be an issue. As Scott alluded to, the size is very compact. Not going to be much different than the noise that's coming out of, some of the current IAs where you have pumps and motors and fans.
Okay.
But I wouldn't expect it to be something that you're really going to notice in the neighborhood.
Yeah, maybe one thought on that, Kathleen. I think it is a good, valid question. I think what Kurt's saying is true, but maybe the best solution here would be if the town's going to be hiring somebody to do the groundwater discharge permit and preliminary design, they could work with the developer and their consultant to ensure that their interests are protected. Because I think there are some options as to where the plant would actually go. And despite the current technology and what Kurt's saying, there's no reason why the plant couldn't be put in the best favorable location to avoid any potential for smells or odor or noise. Because there are air pumps and stuff which you can hear. So why not put them further away from the housing?
Indoor sound insulate them. So,
Right,
I mean,
right.
you know,
So there are ways to deal with that.
Yeah.
but
And I just, in thinking ahead, I just don't want to give abutters
Mhm.
cause for alarm,
Good thought.
to start waving their hands up in the air and saying this isn't going to, fly. So
Absolutely.
we need to think about it. Thank you.
So, I think in terms of those kind of specific details, I think they're very, very valid concerns. And what I think we need to do at the first step here, though, is figure out like cost share and how the arrangements might work. Who's, ultimately when we get a consultant on board to do the design, these are considerations we definitely want to factor in for sure.
Right.
It seems to me we have the data from the BOLA report, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the initial design was, a standalone system for the housing project. And then option C, which, we were recommending and looking at as the preferred option, has a different cost. But the first estimate was based on, engineering cost and construction cost for a standalone system. So I don't think we have a lot of mystery here in terms of what the cost difference is. Does that sound about right to you as well?
I think it does. That's a good point. I mean, that work's been done. And I'll just run that by David and make sure he concurs, given, things have happened between then and now, but I don't think anything's changed. So it should be, that data should be there. That's a good point, Kurt.
So C-A is what the town is going to be on the hook for.
Right.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, so a couple of things. We did spec an IA system in the RFP. So I think one thing that might be helpful is that we could send you that section of our RFP, and what would be great is to get back whatever plug and play that we could put in there for the design of the system that you would like to see. And the second, I was going to make the same comment, is that in the report, they already spec the cost of the IA system.
Mhm.
So if, in terms of cost burden on the developer, if we were prepared to spend that much, then we ought to be able to ask them to spend that much on supporting the wastewater treatment.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the third thing I just wanted to, for everyone's benefit, we just went on a tour of the new Nauset Green housing in Eastham. And they did put in a small wastewater treatment system. They have 65 units there. And if anyone wants to both see the cost and the noise, it's probably something on the order of what you are talking about in terms of the size of the system you might have. The last thing I want to make sure that we are being cognizant of is I think the town can deliver the police and the fire in phase 2. Is the school system, is that a separate consideration, both in terms of the cost to them as well as getting their buy-in?
I would see them. I mean, my thought for an article for town meeting would be to have, we've recommended that we, pursue option C, which includes the school, police, fire, and capacity, and somehow be able to start to look at what you might be able to do in the way of the neighborhood. So in terms of construction, I would see a warrant item that would look like, option C, that amount of money, and that you would phase, actual connections and hookups and that sort of thing along some sort of an engineering schedule that would make sense. But I'm not sure it would make sense to go back to town meeting several times to do option B or option, and then pursue option
Right.
C at a later date. I think we want to have a plan that we think makes sense, present that to town meeting for an up or down vote.
Right. Agree with that.
I don't know, do other people have other ideas or suggestions?
I would agree with you, Kurt, on that.
I would too. I just want to make sure that we have the buy-in of the school before we, and do we need to get separate buy-in from the school, I guess is the question
I wouldn't think so, Gary, because they're a
Yeah.
town, they're a town
money's-
facility.
Yeah, if the money's there to connect them to a different system, I don't, that it's being done for them. So it's not going to be something that's going to affect anybody else's budget. Town's going to have to decide that we're going to pay for this or not.
Okay. And the ongoing maintenance charges to the developer, are they analogous to the ongoing maintenance charges on the IA system?
They're probably a lot less, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. I think there's a couple of other advantages to the developer that don't necessarily appear at the moment. One is that I think the original expectation was they wouldn't have to do advanced treatment. So the cost associated with a system that is, that was contemplated probably doesn't meet what DEP is ultimately going to require, which would be significant, would be more expensive. I don't want to say how much. But for the purposes of this exercise, they would get some benefit because, the system's going to comply to a much higher standard, but the town's going to be kicking in to do the design, the discharge permit and other elements that, is really going to save some money for them and ultimately ease the burden of, getting a compliant system in for the housing project. So I think there's a big win there. It's not really, you can't really put a number on it, but it's, as Hillary's indicated before, what was spec'd is probably not what would have been required. Helen, Ryan, I see that you're on. I don't know if either of you had some thoughts or comments.
Not really for me. The select board voted to support option C. And then I'm just taking in information otherwise of where things are. Thank you.
Terrific.
May I speak?
Sure. Hi, Helen.
Hi. Tagging on to something Kathleen said, which I've been thinking about ever since she said it. I think that options, given the way in the cost of putting in any kind of engineered structures rises exponentially year after year. I think that you should have it be an ask that includes all possible units to be hooked up at once, because this is different than supplying properties with water, very different in many ways. And it's necessary for every lot to have wastewater treated, dealt with in one way or another. And we're under the gun with the 208 plan. This is very different than the water situation. So I need to know more about consideration of adding on, modular add-ons. But I would explore the neighborhood as well as the 3 municipal buildings initially and see if there are people that need to be hooked up. There may not be, you see. I guess what you'd want to do would be to leave the opportunity for any new construction, which, as you said, we are required to have treated with IAs at this point.
So here's the thing that's changed a little bit in thinking, Helen, which, relative to the neighborhood and other hookups. We have to have a net zero or reduce the amount of nitrogen that goes into that watershed per what's coming up from DEP. So what's new is that in order to get those reductions, we're going to have a certain number of additional hookups. My thought is that if we're going to build the infrastructure, so size the infrastructure appropriately for the number of units that we're expecting to add, including the municipal buildings, we can construct that. In terms of the deal that you provide to homeowners, in terms of you now, and I agree with you that this is different, significantly different from the water system, because these folks are going to have to connect. Because we need the reductions. We have to get the reductions. So there's really not an option. This is definitely a situation where, these folks would be required to hook up. And so, we're going to have to figure out what that rate structure would look like for somebody connected to a sewer system.
Right. And is there grants?
Right. And so at least in terms of that component, I would suggest that we, that's going to take some time to consider how that should be put together. But for the moment, there's no downside. There's extremely small cost to building the amount of capacity that we need, and to continue to move forward, assuming that we'll hook up the municipal buildings and 95 Lawrence Road, and then develop a strategy for how to connect the neighborhood and those units. That's a much more complex undertaking, I think. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Kurt, just in terms of timetable, we have a meeting of the 95 Lawrence Task Force on the 22nd, so roughly 10 days from now.
Okay.
We can provide you with our current RFP language with regard to the wastewater today. Is it possible that we could have something back from you in a week or so, 10 days, that we could then consider? Again,
Scott,
we're looking
I don't want to come in.
No, I understand. Well, our timetable is we're trying to get this out the door in the next, roughly 30 days or so. And I'm not sure whether we need to go back to the select board or not, but if we have a final document, that'd be great. So can we get something draft by the 22nd? Is that realistic?
Yeah, again, the document I think you're looking for is coming from, correct me if I'm wrong, is from David Formato. So I think he's ready to provide it, but I don't want to speak for him. So
okay.
I think that's maybe the outstanding question.
Right. So that's one of our questions, right? Is in terms of time.
Hillary, do you know what his schedule is on the report?
I don't, but we can certainly reach out to him and ask.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he submitted that final draft,
Right, right.
last week, and I think we
Yep.
all said that looks good. So we just need the, final report.
Well, I'm happy to reach out to him. As I indicated before, he and I are playing telephone tag right now on a couple of other things. So following this call, I'll try to reach out to him again and make sure he's aware of the list, the January 22nd date, Gary.
That would be great.
Thank you so much.
I think that's achievable, but again, I don't want to speak for him.
Great, thank you.
Kurt, may I ask how
Sure.
I am concerned about the cost to the private individuals. I mean, we have, we already are having, some response from abutters very concerned just about the building project itself. This adds another layer. I mean, I think we have to be really transparent if this is what the town is going for, how we approach this. We were thinking of trying to have a sort of info session with abutters I don't know if this will complicate, how much we can address this unless we know
Mhm.
kind of what the time frame and what possible costs would be for the system. And I am concerned that if we do it, the timeline, if the housing development is done first, to be assured that at least option 2 is going to come forward successful, that there's not going to be some kind of blip that could end up having the developer have to really deal with just that once.
Yeah, that's why I think you're exactly right, Elaine. There's clearly sensitivities there, both to the neighborhood and to the project. That's why I think that, as a warrant article, you'd want to have the article include the town buildings being connected. So, it's a single cost for the system, the basic elements of the, school, fire, police being connected to that system. That's the minimum that we need to connect to have the net neutral project. So the housing project doesn't go forward without having a net zero. So we've got to, part of the strategy here is that has to happen. So I think, in terms of presenting that to town meeting in an article, that's a pretty clear and compelling challenge. As far as the neighborhood goes, we've got a lot of work to do there. I think there are clearly going to be issues. What do the costs look like? Who's sharing what costs in that particular portion? Should those additional residences, given the limited scope, be paying for those connections or for ongoing maintenance? That is part of a town-wide compliance requirement. So, there's a lot of equity issues. There's a lot of financial questions. There's a lot of engineering questions. But I think at a minimum, we have to do police, fire, school, and the housing project and keep it simple. The capacity is there then to do the last step, but that's going to take some work.
Hey, Kurt, if I may, I might just add one of the other items on our agenda has been looking at the cost share on INA systems in other parts of town. And one of the considerations, I think most of you know, the Board of Health has been discussing the possibility of a regulation that would require or provide some subsidy from the town in doing these upgrades. So it may be that if the town does decide to do that, that same level of assistance might be considered to be uniform. So in other words, if the number we're using right now, I think is $12,500, which is the difference in cost between a conventional Title V and what we're considering to be an enhanced INA. So it might be that same number, for example, could be considered as a subsidy for the sewer hookup to help out these people as part of this project. So my guess is there'll be an interest in trying to provide some uniform cost sharing, as Kurt's suggesting, and something needs to be discussed.
Scott, independent of the source of the funding,
yep.
For an individual homeowner, what is the cost to hook up roughly?
Again, I think we need to look back at the Bowler report to see what their total cost was and then divide that by the number of residences. I don't know the number off the top of my head, Gary, but that would be the total cost. And then there's also oftentimes there's a lot by lot cost to run the line from the house out to the street. Mm-hmm. And some towns have decided to have the homeowner pay that. Other times, again, that can be part of the cost share. So there are many options as to how all this gets cost shared. But I think the cost per homeowner, which is what you're asking about, is probably in the Bowler report. And that might be something, I just sent David a quick email, by the way, and hopefully maybe he and I can join you at that January 22nd meeting. And these are probably all
great.
suggestion items for that meeting, but I don't have the number off the top of my head.
For your information, it's at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock, thank you.
Kurt?
Yes.
Helen, can I say something?
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you were at the select board meeting where you presented this, but Scott probably remembers this. The area that's in any way proximate to whatever wastewater system is going to be put in that really needs it is along Briar Lane, not the people that are just to the north of Lawrence Road lot. And given that it's really pretty close, I hope that you would consider those neighbors who would probably be much more interested in hooking up to a wastewater system, which would free up their wells. I just hope that you're considering that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think, you know, and the, you know, Buller report identified, I think it was around 30 residences, Scott, if memory serves me correctly.
That sounds right.
You know, so they did identify an area.
No, that isn't what, hold on. An area, but did they look at that area as opposed to what's just to the north of the Lawrence Road lot, you know, down that hill, which is a relatively new development and there's more room there for septic and so forth.
Yeah, I don't know what they identify was an amount of capacity, and I think your point is well taken, Helen. That, you know, where it comes from is another question. You know, in terms of exactly where it comes from. But the idea of 30 residences, regardless of where those 30 are, that's just an amount of capacity that's available in the system that was, you know, what they thought made sense. So we can certainly talk about that at greater length.
Yeah,
And
you
I
need
think
to, you need to spend the town's money in a situation that's closer to others, you know, the watershed's edge, and B, needs it more. After the recent problem that I had with where the water mains are going to be laid for the extension for the water system, it's important to take a really good look at who needs it most. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Helen.
Hey, Kurt, can I just mention one more thing here? I just got an email response from David Formato that I think it might be worth just, he's saying, I'll just read it. Thanks for the heads up on the meeting. To complete the wastewater part of the housing RFP, we need the final decision of the town on which wastewater option they intend to pursue, blah, blah, blah. So Ryan mentioned earlier, the Board of Selectmen made a vote on this. I guess somebody, my suggestion would be somebody should send David you know, an answer on that so that he can finish. So I think he's waiting on something. He's waiting some final decision from the town. I will speak to him on the phone, but again, I don't want to be the person committing the town to something. So
I can send him an email saying that the selectmen voted on option
all right,
3.
Hillary, I'm going to forward you this email then. Okay.
Okay, perfect. And I'll just peck that off right now.
Thank you.
So, yeah,
And then
send
we
that
can expedite that. Wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else on this item?
Kurt,
Yes.
I noticed that our wonderful consultant, Laura Schufelt, just joined us. She probably thought we were going to be second on the agenda.
Okay.
So I don't know if it would be possible to just do a brief recap for her. She will be at the January 22nd meeting of the task force, but I'm glad that she could get in quickly.
Thanks, Elaine. Sorry I'm so late, and I can catch up with you guys later if it, you know, doesn't make sense to recap just for me at this point.
Well, Laura, if you had some questions coming in, by all means, you know, now would be a perfect time to sort of see if we have answers for those.
You know, I mean, I think the questions around the viability of the project is how much the project would be, you know, expected, if any, to contribute to whatever, if there was going to be a larger system that wasn't just project based.
Right.
That's really
exactly what we've been talking about.
Okay. Okay. So I'll get a recap from Elaine. I apologize for zooming in
No
so late.
problem.
Laura, this is Gary.
Hi.
Is there anywhere in the state they've done something like this so we don't have to rebuild the model that we could perhaps borrow from?
Think Everything's froze for me, so
I thought, I didn't know whether that was a pregnant
Sorry, I
pause
froze.
or.
no, my Zoom froze. So I will say that in the economic development bill that is hopefully going to be signed this week by the governor, there is money to assist towns for infrastructure, especially small towns. I started doing a deeper dive into it, and I can get you a list of the different programs. There's kind of a couple of different places where you could, looks like you could access things for infrastructure that would, some of them have to be, obviously there's Mass Works, but then there's others that are specific just to towns with under 7,000 population. So I think that could be helpful. Some have to be connected to affordable housing, some are just infrastructure. And again, it's stacking resources, but that's how we make projects work, Unfortunately, there's not one source that we can go to, except Mass Works, which could do, it could definitely assist in, could pay for the whole thing, basically, if it was awarded. So, and yes, other towns do it. Usually they combine an upgrade or a septic system that would include a failed system from a school or something like that. That's been done before.
Hey, Laura, this is Scott Horsley. I have a quick question, if I may, on that subject. Are you familiar with the state's Smart Growth Zoning District program that provides funding from the state to the towns if they set up such a district, and might that be applicable here?
Yes, but it's, I assume you're talking about 40R.
Yes, yes.
40R would encompass a larger, has to be kind of contiguous. So you have to kind of draw a map. And the money from the state is based on the increased density that's allowed between what's allowed now and what would be allowed after. And the minimum density is, I think they've changed it so many times recently for the what they call the neighborhood starter homes, which is kind of cottage development. I think is 8 per acre, and multifamily was 20 per acre. So could it? Yes, it would be, the money coming to the town probably would not be, wouldn't rise to the level of what we're looking for here. It also has, if then there are students that come into any of the residential units that are built, if they're coming from out of district, then there's 40S that would pay for that. But it really works better in a district that's that has low density, has the infrastructure, can handle 20 units per acre. So
thank you.
Or if you were looking at a cottage development of 8 per acre, that's still pretty dense for cottages. So
Great. Richard, did I see you have your hand up earlier? Were you trying to jump in?
No.
No? Okay.
I do actually have a question, and that is, if we're going to plan on having residential houses hook up to the system, are they all going to be required to hook up at the same time, or are we going to wait for their systems to fail? Is there a phase in? I do think it's something that needs to be addressed for the housing authority so that they don't look as if they're not being transparent when they talk with the neighbors. And it can't be something where, several months down the road, we say, oh, by the way, you're going to have to hook up. So, I think that needs to be explored sooner rather than later.
I'll just offer a quick comment there. I think if the town hooks up the municipal buildings, that gets you to the net zero requirement alone. So from the state perspective, that may be the minimum.
Okay.
And then I think if that's true, then that provides flexibility to answer your question, Richard, meaning the town could do any of the things you mentioned. They could be, phased in over time, or they could be more aggressive, but I think there might be some flexibility, but that's something we can certainly explore.
And certainly, Richard's part of it's going to depend on, how much grant funding can we find? If we can get enough grant funding, it may, the homeowners may be looking at no cost. So that's something we just don't know right now.
If I could, sorry, I don't have my video on. If I could just make a comment. I just lost it. I'll come back to it. Sorry.
Around grant funding and homeowners not having to pay anything.
While Laura's looking for that, I have one question for either
Sure.
Ryan or Helen. I've heard some talk about pushing back the date of town meeting, that is pushing it further into the spring from the April. And this has to do with whether or not we can get an article in this year's town meeting warrant. Any comment on that? What's the anticipated date of town meeting?
Gary, it came up last night and they're going to have it on their next agenda for their next meeting later on this month. They're going to discuss when town meeting will take place. That's a conversation that needs to happen with all the boards and departments, plus the town moderator. And it's looking like, I heard last night, May.
Similar in the later, so it gives you a little bit more time, Kurt.
And I just remembered what I was going to say. If you're looking at MassWorks, the sooner you talk to Jackie at EOHED, if you are not already, the better. She's a great resource. She's the person who runs the program, and she's very helpful to communities, especially I found, especially in small communities that don't have a lot of staff to assist, and is also realistic with you on what you can kind of expect in the process. So I would, I know Jim, I don't think he's here. I know he's talked to her in private, and Mike Travato have talked to her in the past. But I think keeping a line of communication with her is important.
Terrific. Yes, I was gonna lean on Jim.
Laura, I don't know if one of the big questions we were talking about was figuring out the language for the RFP and the equitable cost to the developer in looking at this potentially three phase system. And we talked about what's spec'd in the Bowler report for just the NIA system for the housing project alone. And would that cost be considered an equitable cost share for the developer in a system that's really spec'd at $4 or $5 or more million?
I haven't really looked at financial feasibility with those numbers from Bowler yet. I typically in these kind of projects, the most recent ones on the Cape for project-specific systems, they've been paid for by CPA or trust fund monies by the town. Now, sometimes, I think in two of the cases, the land was privately bought, so it wasn't free land. And one of them, it was free land, but there was some, they didn't pay for the complete system. They paid for a portion of the system. So I can I'll look at Bowler's numbers and plug that into a pro forma and see if it works, or, I mean, they're back of the envelope kind of things, but we have a lot of projects to compare it to. So I can get back to you on that.
And keep in mind, to the extent that we're successful with, obviously, I don't want to, we don't know what level of grant funding might or might not be available. But, I think, Scott, you said this at the last meeting. Because of the attractiveness of this project in terms of being not just net zero, but potentially being a nitrogen reduction project for the watershed. The story is great for grant funders. It's possible we could get enough money to cover the whole project, which would mean benefits to the developer as well.
Yeah. Right on, Kurt.
So, anybody have anything else on this topic? Seeing none, thank you, Gary, Kathleen, Olga, Elaine, everybody who came, Ryan, Helen. I don't know if you're here for other items, but we really appreciate your input.
Thank you so much for all the work you guys are doing. We really appreciate it as well.
I'm going to echo that, Kurt. I want to thank the Wastewater Committee for doing due diligence on this, kind of on the fly, if you will. Thank you, Scott, for all your input and insight on this. I agree, going back to something you said several months ago, Scott, this is a win-win for the town. And Kurt, you know how I feel about you, so see you, bye.
Thank you very much. Remember, you're most welcome at our January 22nd.
Terrific.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day. Stay healthy.
So with that, Scott, we're about an hour into the meeting. I was hoping we could keep it a little bit shorter. I don't want to, so I'm just trying to look at the agenda. We had talked about moving on to this discussion of, how we want to handle a responsible management entity, and, start to think about how that would work in the town of Wellfleet. We also have a discussion here of PRB's status on the Board of Health regulation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the town meeting article and wastewater program budget. So given that I'd kind of like to see if we could pare this down to about a half an hour so we don't keep people here for a long time.
Kurt, I think I can do it in 15 minutes. And
Okay.
Hillary has my slides, so if she's be willing to share her screen, I will just quickly hit the high points. Respect the time commitment here.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you off. I don't want to cut it
that's all
short
right.
unnecessarily either. So I think we'll need to continue to meet, especially on, a warrant article or, the budget for this is an ongoing discussion, but.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and scroll down, Hillary, keep going.
Keep going.
Yep, go down. Maybe just stop there quickly. Go back one, please. So this is the calculator that I've shown you before, which kind of is the math on how we get to the required reductions. And what I've done is I've highlighted the things that I wanted to talk about today. And one of them, of course, is 95 Lawrence, so we don't need to go there. And if you go to the next slide, this just shows the proximity of some of these projects, which you guys well know, so we don't need to spend a lot of time there. But keep in mind, as I think everybody's aware, that solving this problem is going to require a multi-pronged approach, one of which we just finished discussing. And then you can go ahead, I think, a couple slides, because the next two slides are 95 Lawrence that we've covered. So let's go past that. And just a minute or two on PRBs. You may recall that in the past, we've been talking about a PRB possibility along Commercial Street, which I still believe is quite an interesting place to do this. And the two technologies you're looking at is this first one, which shows kind of a vertical wall. And this is what the type of PRB that was installed down at Waquoit Bay in Falmouth, you may recall. It's been working quite well. And the next slide shows an alternative approach to a PRB, which is a series of injection wells. And this is what they're doing in Orleans with quite a bit of success. So those are the two techniques that have been looked at. We have a third option for your consideration, which we've been talking about with the Conservation Commission and other people, If we just go ahead there, again, Hillary, please.
Got it.
There's the location of the potential pilot project at the end. We've talked about this before, so you can go ahead again. Keep going. Again, sorry, that's a repeat. The next two slides are repeat.
Okay. Yep. Next to a repeat here.
There we go. That's the one I want to show. So
Yay.
another option is to, and I don't recall if we talked about this with the wastewater committee or not, Kurt. So I want to repeat. I think we did have Annika Quick, one of my students, present.
Yeah, she talked briefly about it, but sure.
So this is, I won't repeat everything then. This is the third option, which I think is quite intriguing, is to build these right at the water, at the shoreline margin as part of some sort of a bulkhead structure. So this is just one picture, and then the next slide just shows kind of an oblique 3D of the same thing, which we won't go through details right now, but maybe the next slide is the best one that just shows a photo of one that's been installed in Long Island with some pretty good results. And suffice it to say that, and I'm just looking ahead here, you can see this structure is right along the shoreline, and what they're doing is they're integrating the wood chip, so-called reactive media, with a bulkhead construction, which might be being done as a reconstruction of some structure that's maybe falling apart or has to be built up because of sea level rise, etc. And then if we go to the next slide, I'll just mention that we've been collaborating with Ryan, who's provided us some good data here. And this is a quick map of the number of bulkheads that are out there in the town, which frankly was a lot more than I had thought. And the concept we've been thinking about, and we discussed this with the Conservation Commission, it was last week, would be that as these structures come up for permitting to reconstruct, repair, enlarge, raise, that might be a very opportune time to essentially add the wood chips, if you will. My quick guess is that the majority of the cost of the construction would be being a cost that would already be being employed by the property owner who's doing the excavation and construction. But we might be able to work out a situation where we can work with that property owner when they're doing this project anyways to add the reactive media and possibly get a very cost-effective incremental project. Now, as Kurt points out, this alone is not going to solve the town's problems, but it struck me as an opportunity to think about. And again, we did have a preliminary discussion with the Conservation Commission. And I think what it does is it raises the question, do we want to consider this as one of the, as the pilot project construction at Commercial Street? We now have really three options to think about: the trench method, the injection well, and then this so-called bulkhead PRB structure as an option. And that's all I had on the PRBs. I don't know if we want to pause for a second here and see if there are questions on this, Kurt.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think, first of all, I think it's, I'm glad that Ryan brought this to our attention. I think it's a no-brainer to be, to think about a regulation that would require when you're replacing a bulkhead to do whether it's wood chips or some sort of injection to provide additional, all of these locations are right at the margin, as you mentioned, Scott. I mean, this is literally intercepting the last few inches of where groundwater would be flowing into the estuary. So, it's a great place to do it. My kind of concern is that's I don't know how much bulkhead mileage is going to get replaced over what period of time. So it's hard to estimate, how much it's going to produce for benefit. The other thing is it's leaky, right? Some places there are bulkheads, some places there's, natural interface to the watershed. So it's not like you're creating, a complete continuous interception margin. So I think, it's a both and is how I see it. I mean, I think it would make sense to do a regulation and continue with the standard PRB project that you've conceived of all along, where we'd have something that's continuous along from, say, Main Street and Route 6, all the way around to, say, Keller's Corner or something like that, past the along Mayo Beach, in that area, if you looked at your map with all of those green dots, that's an interception area that's a substantial amount of interception for the harbor.
So two quick responses, Kurt. Thank you. One is, remember that this is a 30-year, and I'll add plus plan. So the fact that this is going to be happening over a period of time is very consistent with what I'm envisioning for the watershed plan.
Mhm.
And the thought would be, as these come up over the next several decades, that maybe, again, it's an opportune time. The other thing I want to point out is a good question came up at the Concom hearing, and that was, how do we know these work? And my answer was, we don't. There's only one that I know of that's been installed in Long Island. It was a pretty well refereed study in the publication, et cetera. I participated in a webinar with EPA on it, and we were all intrigued with it. But the thought would be that before a regulation is considered, I think by the Concom, that we might want to build one as a pilot, which leads me back to the Commercial Street project. We don't need to decide this today, but as you'll see, if we get to the last slide here, I did prepare a very rough first cut budget on a number of items. We can just go to that, Hillary, thanks.
Can I just ask one question before we go to that? We talk about not knowing if these PRBs work, but we know that the PRBs work because there are PRBs,
oh yeah,
around. So I think we need to be clear, and I think that might have gotten confused at the Conservation Commission meeting, that we know that permeable reactive barriers work. We just haven't seen them installed in coastal engineered structures, but
that's right.
So,
Thank you for clarifying that.
So I just think we need to be clear about that, because it seemed like the commissioners were like, well, if we don't know this works, how are we going to make people install them? But we do know that the technology works. So I think
absolutely true.
I was going to say the same thing, Hillary. Thank you. They're no different than any other PRB. It's just you're locating it in something that's protected.
Yes, exactly. Sorry.
No problem. So I'm skipping over quite a bit here, but again, the other stuff I skipped over is partially captured here. I will just mention, looking back at the earlier slides, if you could just go back 2 slides, Hillary, first, just because I want to get this in front of the committee.
This one?
Yeah. So yes, thank you. That's perfect. So we, meaning a group of people in town, several people on this call, Hillary, I think Ryan and others, have been involved in some discussions with Mass DOT on this Route 6 highway project and a related project on Haas Pond, which is right there. And one of the things we've talked about is trying to use that project as a means of trying to enhance, again, nitrogen removal. In this case, get the state to pay for this. Remember, this is part of the 208 plan. It's part of our overall plan to do stormwater improvements over time. And this is a big one, again, right at the headwaters of Duck Creek, where the state's going to be doing excavation. So what I've done is highlighted this plan, which is an engineering plan the state has developed as a first cut with some possible ideas. And again, we don't need to decide on this. I'm really just wanted to give this to you for informational purposes. And we've started a conversation with DOT about this possibility of integrating some so-called green infrastructure. And I've included a couple of pictures here of, and you've seen these, I'm sure, median strips that's either grassed or vegetated that could be employed there, as opposed, currently, as you know, there's concrete, a raised concrete structure as the median, and then there's possibilities to do this along the margins. So again, this is just a conversation we've started, and I just want to make the committee aware of it. I don't know if there's any decisions we need to make on this today, other than what the state did agree to continue a dialogue on this. So again, I just wanted to make you aware of that. Unless there's any questions, we can move to that last slide again.
Actually, Scott, if you wouldn't mind, Fred, go ahead.
So a couple of things, let's, first off, I think we need to prioritize what kind of PRB solution that we think is be the smartest one to go for. From my perspective, right? PRB bulkheads, putting in a regulation, fine. But the bottom line is that, do we want to spend our energy on putting together regulation when as well as I do, when you put in a bulkhead, you put it for 50 years. These things are super expensive.
Yep.
And when you look at that the graphic that Ryan provided us, I know those bulkheads. Some of those are like 100-year bulkheads. They're not going anywhere.
Right.
You're not gonna see anything. Now, granted, on the lowest portion of Commercial Street, there's a bunch of old wooden bulkheads that are completely disintegrated, especially in your project area. That maybe an avenue to to try out this a PRB solution there. But once again, I mean, like anytime you say to anybody, hey, listen, I'm going to put in a bulkhead, and I realize this is a 30-year plan. Well, bulkheads are put in for 50, 100 years. I mean, these are super, super expensive things,
Yep.
permitting and everything else. So with that said, I'm kind of going, I think a PRB bulkhead is a great idea. I think a PRB bulkhead is something that we could put into our regulation. But if we're going to spend our efforts, where are we going to hone our efforts? Where are we going to get the most bang for a buck? I'm looking more at those, injection, that injection technology, because you could basically just, start putting holes down Commercial Street and do the entire Commercial Street for a whole lot less than it will cost for, a PRB bulkhead. And then going back to, and so, I mean, like the sticker shock on a bulkhead is, I mean, like 100 feet of bulkheads, cost you $1 million. I mean, go to how much Mac just spent. So putting in that bulkhead around, the old Button Factory and the and Mac Shack. I think that was something close to $2 million worth of work. I can't remember it. And he ain't doing that, and he ain't going to replace that in the next 30 or 40 years. Yeah.
Richard? Any comment? You're on mute. Richard, you're still muted.
I don't know whether we need to go either or in this. I mean, I think maybe we have to say we're going to spend money doing a bulkhead PRB. Fred is right that they're not going to be replaced as often. And we probably need to have some way that we can say that the technology works. I agree with Fred that we should spend the town's money on doing other things, but it doesn't mean that we can't try to get a regulation in for replacement on, right along the water. So I think we can pursue both, but maybe spending the town's money on something else that's more likely to occur in a more reasonable time period makes more sense.
Also thinking of our time and our resources. I mean, like, let's go towards, spending our time initially. I mean, like I said, a regulation is a good idea to put it for requiring PRB bulkheads when they're replaced, but do we want to spend our time focusing on that regulation, or are we better off spending our time on, okay, what can we actually do now that is cost effective?
If I may, can I jump in?
Sure. Go ahead, Ryan.
Some of the materials I've provided on this list the bulkheads that are due for replacement based on their current condition. They're either wood or the old concrete bulkheads that are, the concrete's starting to fall apart. And overall, roughly a third of Wellfleet's bulkheads are due for replacement within the next, decade or so. And one of them that I looked at from that I got from Hillary is on Chequesset Neck Road. And they are replacing a wooden bulkhead with another wooden bulkhead. And we all know that the wooden bulkheads don't last as long as the stone ones do. So we can expect a fair amount of turnover of the pre-existing bulkheads just based on the wooden ones and the older concrete. And that also, there will be additional lengths of bulkheads constructed as sea level rises. And people are trying to protect their homes that are grandfathered in, and which is pretty common along the bay side. So, this is the idea is that because you're already doing the excavation there, and one of the biggest costs in installing a PRB is the excavation costs. If you're doing a trench method, which is what these are kind of analogous to, is to, is that the marginal cost would be extremely low comparatively to installing a fresh length of PRB from, where you're doing the full installation without any pre-existing excavation at that site. So thank you.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree, Ryan. I think, everything you said makes a lot of sense. What I kind of agree with everybody. I think what, to me makes the most sense is you've got two issues too. One is bulkheads are on private property typically, except for the pier. So we do have an issue of, getting, if we don't have a regulation, then it's getting permission of the private property owner to do this. And even to do a pilot, which, my thought would be, why not wait till there's, a bulkhead application and then approach that private landowner and say, hey, would you mind if we, if you guys put some, if you followed this injection approach, could we do some monitoring to see how this works? So that we at least have a monitoring project of a PRB bulkhead, in the pipeline at some point, whether that's, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, at whatever point there's a bulkhead that comes through for permitting. I mean, I do think that makes a lot of sense. But I still think at core, as Fred said, we have control over the municipal roads, so we can do PRBs, complete PRB, on municipal property and have continuous, PRB coverage that we control. So we don't control bulkheads, but we do control the roadways. So I think there's an issue of control that DEP is going to have some concern over with respect to whatever we can do with bulkheads. But I still think bulkheads make sense. And, doing a regulation is not a lot of time and effort, as Richard pointed out. So, I think it makes a lot of sense to do the regulation, try to work with Conscom, go back to their meeting and, explain that, these things really do work. What we'd like to do is the next time you get an application, see if we can get an agreement from the homeowner to do a monitoring project. The incremental cost, as Ryan points out, is nothing. So, the cost to do this is really nothing, but it's the monitoring. So, that, I don't know, how do other people feel about that?
Kurt, I might suggest that, again, in the interest of time, if we move to the last slide, I think we might be able to preserve this discussion. So if I talk about bullet number 3 here first, what I've been thinking about and talking with Kurt about is what should we be thinking about to move this program forward, given the town meeting schedule and et cetera, et cetera. So one possibility under that third bullet there, the hydrogeo investigation, the pilot design, could be, we don't need to make a decision on which technology. That site at Commercial Street, I think, could accommodate any of the 3 technologies. So maybe the process here is, if the town is willing and ready, would be to authorize some investigation at that site. And it might even be possible to put a couple different technologies there and evaluate them side by side. So I was just thinking that it might be time to begin a discussion about some of these costs moving forward. And the PRB project is something that we can continue to talk about, but still consider funding something there, keep it rolling. So maybe starting from the top here, just to walk through this.
Can I just ask a question about that though, Scott?
Sure.
In terms of doing something at Commercial Street, is there any reason to believe that the benefit of a PRB, whether it's injection, I mean, I do think it makes some sense to look at injection versus wood chips on a site that we control. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
But is there any reason, I can't think of a place that there's a bulkhead that would make sense on, or at least the parcel that I'm thinking of, across from the Masonic, hall there. It's really, it's either wood chips or injection. There's no bulkhead there. And I wouldn't imagine that we'd construct one. So do you have thoughts on that?
No, although whoever said it, the possibility of working with an adjacent private landowner might be something to consider. I know that the Cape Cod Commission is doing some vulnerability mapping of shoreline. As I recall, this area, Duck Creek area, there's a number of properties that have been flagged as likely areas where private property owners might be doing some upgrading. I don't know the details on that, but it might be possible to, as part of this investigation, would be to approach some of these other property owners and see if they're interested in participating. I don't know. Beyond that, I don't know. It's a good point, Kurt.
So for the purposes of what we're looking at, I think we'd want to have, as part of a budget, we'd want to have conceptually the idea that there would be some monitoring money for a PRB bulkhead, but then in terms of a proposed project, that it would make sense to focus on the commercial street location to do our initial demonstration and maybe look at wood chips and injection. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. So just some other cost things, just to put it out in front of you. I don't know, we talked about town meeting, although I didn't hear what the warrant deadline was for the May meeting, but these are some other costs that maybe the town could start considering. Hillary, you may want to jump in on this first one, because I know we've had a few meetings with the Board of Health. I don't know how close they are ready to consider the regulation, but if and when they are, part of that, as it's currently drafted, would be a town cost share. So I put in a placeholder here of 20 systems. The other way to look at this, I've been part of discussions in other towns, and somebody in the town of Barnstable just said every new Title V system that's going in these critical areas is actually an added cost to the town, because at some point they're going to come back and fix that. So that's another way of kind of looking at this in terms of going forward. But in any case, the first item here really is to provide the town some money to provide that subsidy. And then there's also, I put a placeholder in on this RME discussion as well, because as you point out, Kurt, somebody's going to have to be in charge of, maintaining, reporting, and monitoring these. And this is just a very rough estimate of what that cost might be. So that's what those costs are. The 95 Lawrence is what I mentioned earlier, the groundwater discharge permit estimate, 125,000. The PRB costs we've already kind of covered. The pilot project cost actually comes from the Long Island study. That was a $350,000 study. I think it's also probably pretty close to what they're spending in Orleans for the injection well program. And then I'll just mention the last bullet. I have ongoing discussions with Nancy for the shellfish work, and these numbers are not complete, but she and Johnny and others are working on a budget to put in here that would consider some additional propagation. So again, these numbers are very rough, but these are the components that I've thought of so far that we might want to consider as initiating this program. And I'll just stop there.
So I think we might have lost Richard.
Oh, I'm still here.
Oh, good. Okay.
So, I mean, I guess, I'm looking at those 4 bullets there, Scott and Kurt and Richard and on the call, and I'm basically going, okay, is this something that we want to turn into a warrant item? That these are the things that we would like to do, and this is how much it's going to cost, or are we going to try to say, okay, guys, let's be realistic here. What are the ones, what are the things that we think will pass muster at town meeting? I could see the the advanced A&I system, providing money for 20 advanced systems, to supplement, because on a yearly basis we put in I don't know, I can't remember the number. I think it was something like, we get, Hillary, you can help us out here, but we upgrade septic systems across the town by so much, in so many every year. So here's an opportunity now to, do some pilot programming with enhancing systems as they come in, and the town needs to support this as a pilot. That seems like something that that the town could probably get around. Doing a pilot program on on PRBs on Commercial Street, that might be something that the town could get around. The culture thing, that's sort of already in the works. So does that really need to be on a town warrant item? I guess I'm kind of confused. Let me start. Is this something? Are these things that we want to put on the warrant? What do we want to put on? Are these bullet items the things that we want to, go to the town and put on the warrant? Is my question.
Richard?
I would think that if we want money, that's where we have to go.
Okay, so
And what we want to do in the next year.
yeah.
what we wanna
So
get
which one of
money
these
for.
things do you feel are we going to need money for? Of those 4 bullets?
Well, I would think we definitely need money for the advanced INEs.
Yeah.
If we want to do something on Commercial Street, we're going to want money for that. The shellfishing thing, is that our dime, or is that something that the shellfish people should be going with? I mean, some of these are items that might fall under the bailiwick of some other entity, but if they're not going to propose it, should we be proposing it? I mean, I sort of shudder at the idea that we're going to go to the town and say, look, we want $1 million this year. That's a big number. And it's unclear from these numbers what the timetable is in terms of spending the money. Is this something that we're going to be going back to the town every year and asking for $1 million to do more projects? I think at some point the town is going to say no. So,
or it becomes part of the the capital and operating budget. So, for example, advanced INE pot of money, we just plan on in the budget every year we put in $700,000 or something like that, because we plan on every year we upgrade 70 systems, and therefore we're going to need this amount of money to to match whatever the homeowner has to put in.
right. So to what extent can we get a budget to incorporate the things that we're looking for, as opposed to going to the town meeting and proposing them and having to try to sell town meeting on each one? How do we shift this from being our articles of certain money to part of the town's annual budget? Or is this the process? We start this way slowly, and then at some point we've convinced the town that it makes sense and somebody incorporates it into the town budget.
Well, I think too, this is all going to get drafted into our watershed permit, right? So it becomes our plan moving forward to satisfy the requirements from DEP and EPA. And so looking at the cost estimates, the shellfish piece is so small in comparison to the 3 other pieces. And we haven't yet attempted the 3 other pieces. So if we had to pair something off, I would pair off the shellfish piece at this point and move forward with the top 3, because those are sort of concrete things that DEP is going to look for in our plan. So seeing that we have these 3 things that we've talked about, in addition to the shellfish, we really are doing what we're doing in our watershed permit. So I don't know if that helps or hinders any, but
I think it does, but I think the logical question is this the toe in the door, or is this what the town's going to spend every year? I mean, it's going to raise certainly a lot of issues in terms of what the town is going to commit to. I mean, sort of like the 95 Lawrence project. You don't want to go in and not represent what percentage or what the likelihood of future monetary requests are.
right. And I guess, the INA cost would be year after year, we would do that cost. The construction the construction costs fall out for the permeable reactive barrier and 95 Lawrence, and we move forward with just monitoring. So we would probably want to be able to break those costs down more to show at town meeting that this is the one-time cost and then the recurring costs are this. And the recurring costs should appear in a budget somewhere, not going back to town meeting year after year.
Hillary, I think that's correct, although the PRB project recognized this is a pilot, and the thought would be if it works as well as we hope it works, then that gets extended down places like Commercial Street. So there would
Yeah.
be future costs there, but hopefully they'd be on a very cost-effective basis in terms of dollars per kilogram compared to the, centralized system, which is the backup plan, which DEP is going to require us to have in there in the plan.
And I think
There also been-
this is probably one of those discussions we wanted to have with Maria. I think Kurt and Scott, did you get circulated a meeting date?
I
Yeah,
just saw a
Thursday.
Zoom invite, but I didn't see a date on it, and I was going to
Okay,
ask
so
about that.
I think they were shooting for Thursday. I think it's next Thursday at 11, but then while we were on this meeting, I got a cancellation. So I'm guessing that date doesn't work, but
Yeah.
I think we want to have this discussion with Maria too and
Yeah.
gain her insight into how she thinks we should fund this as well.
I think that's a good idea.
The other thing I had, my other thought on this is that a lot of this stuff should be, like if we have a 30-year, plan, then we got to have a 30-year budget, and that 30-year budget should be part of the town's capital and operating budget every year. Because it doesn't make sense to go back every year and say, oh, we'd like a little bit more money for another section of Commercial Street to do some PRB installation. We just simply have to say, we're going to pilot this. If it seems to work, we're going to put this is going to be part of the yearly budget. It just has to be. And,
Yeah.
and impress upon the town and residents is that, just like we have to paint the town hall, or we have to maintain the town hall every year and all the other buildings, we have to maintain our waterways.
Yeah.
And we haven't done a very good job of it. We haven't made it part of our capital and operating budget in the past, but now we do. So just accept it. It's how we make our money. It's how we, it is a huge resource. It is one of our, if it's not the biggest resource in our town, I can't think of a bigger resource,
So I think, Richard, back to your original question, I agree with you, Fred. But back to your original question, do we stick our toe in the water here, Richard? Or, are we proposing something like what Fred is talking about, which is a 30-year budget? And I think part of the challenge is we don't have a level of specificity to look at how we would do this 30-year budget, like which projects do make sense and don't. And if you look at how DPW or other town departments are funded, the police department's one, it's got, that's pretty set and everybody knows what's going on. But DPW looks more like, I think, what this would look like, and maybe the water system. So you've got a core level of activities that are going on that you have some. One of the things that the town has to do, I think, is finally commit to staff resources to maintain this effort, for this effort to be ongoing. There's got to be, institutional support that's going to, continue to manage the projects, evaluate the projects, do the reporting for DEP, et cetera. And then there's a capital component that would go along with, project A, like this, let's just say the PRB, is a slam dunk. We get fabulous results, and you want to expand that to a project. Then you go to town meeting and you say, okay, we need X amount of dollars to take this pilot and expand it to, to include this area. You'd have to budget that separately because you wouldn't know what the cost is. You wouldn't know how to go to town meeting to ask for that money. So I think what we've got right now, what Scott's proposed, is kind of a blended approach where you have some capital items, these initial pilot projects, and some operating budget. And I think that's that may be the way to look at it, and to think about, how much do we really need for an operating budget, and what's that, ongoing operating budget look like? And how much for capital this year versus next year versus the following year. To Richard's point, let's assume 95 Lawrence, we assume already that the 95 Lawrence project is something that we're going to have to do. We only have 125,000 in there for, for a water discharge permit. We need also to be thinking about what's the construction cost, what's the permitting cost, what's this actually what was the actual number to hook up police, fire, school, and those units, whatever the number they are at 95 Lawrence. We should be thinking about that whole budget. And notwithstanding, Richard, your original comment, which is, going to town meeting with something that looks like $1 million is a tough sell in this environment. So, that's why we're having this discussion. I think we've got to think through all of the different elements here and try to come to some, and I don't know that we'll do it necessarily in this meeting, but I wanted to start the conversation about how do we get to, to something that, we can present at town meeting in a logical fashion that folks would say, yep, this makes sense. I see what you're going to do here, and I see how you're going to be coming back to town meeting to fund things in the future.
Kurt, if I can just add, my sense is this is a great conversation. Thanks for everybody's input. This is exactly what I was hoping for, just to get some response to this first thinking about this. There's a little bit of chicken and egg here, meaning we're proposing technologies that DEP in the watershed permit is going to say, well, maybe if they work well, we're going to let you do that as a long-term solution. So to do a long-term budget, which we'd all like to see, part of it is it depends on the performance of some of these technologies. And we don't know that until we do the pilots. So it is, as you're suggesting, Kurt, it is a little bit of a blended approach. Thinking about the timing, I hope to have a draft report on the plan done sometime in March or April before town meeting. So we would have a plan at that point. But what I'm thinking ahead is, I think we know some of the elements that I think, at least in my opinion, things that I am recommending to you that would be part of that plan. So recognizing how towns raise their money and the time factor, that's why I thought it was worth talking about now, because if we think the plan is going to include some of these elements, I do, then we're going to need some preliminary money to get them up and running. And that was really the purpose of this.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, I certainly understand this is a little complicated. It is for me too, because of the type of plan we're developing here. We're not designing and building a wastewater plant where we can kind of predict all that over the next 30 years. We're proposing, I think, an iterative, adaptive management plan using a bunch of different technologies. So that's why I put this together in the way I did. And I again, appreciate all your input and apologize that I can't be more definitive long-term. I think we could include the bowler costs on the 95 Lawrence project that could go out over a number of years. I can't recall their proposed construction time, whether that was within the next year or not. I think not, because the permitting is going to take up to a year on that. But certainly we have those costs from bowler looking forward. So that's something we could make the town aware of.
Yeah, and I don't mind, I think given the nature of the town budget and the current political environment, I think kind of the way you've presented this, Scott, makes more sense. Originally, I was thinking we should be thinking about going to town meeting to request, the money for construction of the wastewater treatment facility, for example, in 95 Lawrence. I think if we have a budget there that anticipates supporting the groundwater discharge permit, it's pretty clear that there's a commitment there. But I can't recall the figure off the top of my head, but it's within the year with that permitting money, you're gonna have a much better cost estimate to go to town meeting.
Yep.
But isn't the town committing in the RFP for the housing project? Isn't the town essentially committing to building it?
It's, well, that's
If the
the,
developer, if the winning bidder developers moves forward, they're moving forward based upon the representation of the RFP that's
Right.
now building the system.
Richard, I would suggest the town would be committing to building the first module, which would accommodate the housing project, their share of it. Beyond that, I don't know that the commitment to build the whole thing goes to the developer. That's really becomes part of the watershed permit commitment, right? So I think it's commitment to design and build a facility that would be large enough to accommodate the housing
36,
project,
yeah,
with the
36.
developer paying for their share of the construction costs. That's my take on the commitment there to the developer.
Right, and but the question is, I think to Richard's point, Scott, what should we have in here for a budget for the town?
Well, it's a good question. If we do stick with that net zero requirement, which I think is correct on the part of DEP, it probably would be that second phase commitment of connecting the municipal buildings would be the minimum cost commitment the town is committing to make the housing project go forward, right?
Yeah, so the question is whether you put in an amount that's going to cover the operational needs to get to a groundwater discharge permit, or you also include, the construction costs, at this particular point in time, given that I don't know what the right answer is, but, given the fact that the construction is going to take place over the next, I don't think construction would be for another 3 years.
Right.
I'm not sure it makes sense to be going to town meeting to say we want to do construction costs for this project now. Right.
I agree, but I do think that we ought to go to town meeting and say, this is what the town's involvement in this project is going to be in total. So it's not as if we're going for the groundwater discharge permit, as if that's the only portion of the project
Yeah.
that the town's going to incur a cost. We should be transparent about that with the town, so that when we do go back and ask for more money, it's not like, well, we've already given you the money that we thought was going to be involved with the project. The other thing is, I think whatever we propose, we have to keep hammering. The alternative is a wastewater treatment plant.
Right.
The alternative is a wastewater treatment plant, because whatever we do is going to seem inexpensive compared to that.
Yeah, the alternative is $160 million warrant article.
Yeah. So.
But.
So if we're going to go for a warrant article this year for money, it seems to me that we should try to, I think the numbers that Scott has presented are good, but we need to try to flesh them out in terms of what the costs are for the next year, what are sort of recurring costs, I think it's our first opportunity to go to the town and say, this is what we're facing. And we're requesting money. I mean, I think we've done it a bit in the past, but this is the first time we're going to ask for a lot of money. And this is what the alternative is.
Yep. Helen?
Say something? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
You say something about selling this at town meeting, which is that in the long run, if we had to go to a large septic waste treatment thing over at the transfer station, not only would it be more expensive in the beginning, but maintaining it and keeping those pipes in shape over years would be way more expensive. You know what I say about the water system? Hey guys, most of the money that's going to be spent on this is in the future. In other words, that is an important sell, but the most important sell, and this is a receptive audience for things like this, is not the gun to our head about the 208 plan. It's the fact that this will work better than having a large septic system over at the transfer station. It will treat the water closer to where it's taken from, and it will work better. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. And one other point is this one's, at last town meeting, there was a requirement that we consider climate change in all of our thinking here. And this is a significantly less climate impactful approach because of the energy costs associated with pumping and moving and treating a lot of water in a traditional system. I mean, this is way less energy intensive, much more climate friendly than building a wastewater treatment facility at the transfer station. So I think there's those, finance, and then climate change, occurs to me the sell points. But, getting back to, I think Richard's questions and Fred's, at the end of the day, what do we want? What dollar amounts do we want to put in, and for what buckets? And how do we want to at least organize the financial presentation? But I think this is a good start, Scott. Hillary, the one thing I'm thinking about not to skip around too much, but thinking about the shellfish piece, I totally support obviously some shellfish piece. I think we've got to work out some of the details there, because my biggest concern with shellfish is, how much can you rely on, and what is the, what's the benefit to the harbor? What I see in that proposal is something that helps, is really just funding for the shellfish department's budget, which I'm all for, but I don't think, that produces necessarily continuous or ongoing or reliable nitrogen benefits. So I don't think, I'm not sure DEPs would be comfortable with that as a strategy, at least for, under the 208 guys. So, I think we have some work to do there to get it into the guys that would make sense to augment the shellfish department's budget. But I think it's a great start. And I do think the other piece here is that you've mentioned, Scott, you'll have a draft watershed permit hopefully before town meeting. I think, if we can present, what the watershed permit looks like and what we are asking for at this particular town meeting, that would clarify, hey, look, this overall plan is, it's $10 million. Let's, but it's not 160. And here's how we're proposing to phase it to make it, doable and comfortable within a budgeting process. And I think that may be the right way to kind of think about it or approach it. But, again, we've got to have operating, we have to have capital, and we have to have, I think, it would make some sense if we could to take that watershed permit and plunk down, on a piece of paper, here, assume these pilots went forward, this is what you'd be looking at for potential construction dollars over this period of time. Finance committee is going to want to see that. I think the town's going to want to see that. I'm sure the Board of Selectmen are going to want to see that. What are we really talking about? I think we've slowly begun to get our arms wrapped around this, but I think we have to be able to communicate it better and clarify it for people so they can really see it.
So,
does that make sense? I mean, Scott, is that something we're going to have a draft plan? I mean, is that something that we can do, is do a, 15, 20 year preliminary, this is not, we're not asking for this, but this is what a wastewater program is going to, is probably going to look like in the town of Wellfleet over the next 20 years.
Yeah, we can do that.
when we go, I mean, like, what are we considering as a warrant article here? I mean, like, that's what I keep coming back to. I mean, and that seems to be the agenda item that we're looking at. What are we looking at? Are we looking at, okay, guys, like, for example, the Board of Health is talking about putting in a regulation that anytime you replace or put in a new septic system, it's got to be one of these advanced systems. And that we're going to provide, and that the town will provide assistance to the degree we can. Well, if you got the Board of Health putting that regulation in, we need to provide, at least we need to pilot the assistance part of this, for, fiscal year 2021 or whatever fiscal year we're in. So that's why we're asking for this, money for that, for you know. Is that the kind of warrant article we're looking at putting in?
I think that, yeah, I think
You know,
that makes
because-
sense, Fred.
You know,
I think that's exactly right.
and then the other one that I'm thinking we're kind of going in is as part of our, you know, of our plan, our wastewater plan, we're, you know, other than, you know, we can spend $160 million on a wastewater treatment plant, or we're going to have to, you know, take it in manageable bites. And one of the manageable bites that we're going to have to take is some kind of nitrogen removal systems. And we're looking at these PRBs, and we'd like to see if it works before we dump a bunch of money into it. So why
Right.
don't we, you know, why don't we ask for this money, and this is where we're going to put it, and it's going to be a PRB system, whether it's a bulkhead system or an oil injection system or a wood chip line, whatever. But this is how much we think we need to test this out. We're not, so that'll eventually become part of the, you know, capital and operating budget for protecting our largest resource, which is our harbor and our bays.
Hillary, can you put that, for some reason, the share has dropped on me to look at the slide.
Back
I don't know
up
if you can-
the last
Yeah,
one.
I don't know if you can keep it up there. I think it's
Yeah, I
helpful.
can. I shut it down because I can't see all of you when it's up, but that's fine.
Oh,
It's okay. It's okay.
I think that's a Zoom setting. You just put us on the right panel or something like that. I get everybody plus the slide.
One last thing, guys, is that we're at 3 of 11 right now.
Yeah.
There you go.
We've been going at this for 2 hours, and I don't have much more time.
Yeah.
Kind of just going, okay, you know, when can I have a hard time on this meeting?
Right. So I think we've had a good start here. Why don't we go ahead and schedule schedule our next meeting. We've obviously got a lot to continue to talk about. We'll also, between, let's say, now and next week, hopefully we'll be able to meet with the town administrator to talk about how they might look at financing some of these elements. For example, the IA piece could be done out of the Airbnb funds. There's a piece that's related to putting forward some grant applications. One of the things that we could be doing under the 95 Lawrence is, we've got some amount of money for groundwater discharge permit, but that also ought to include pursuing the grants to build option C. Even though we're not asking for the town to fund that right now. So anyway, I think for the next meeting, what we could do is we still got to talk about how we should be looking at, a responsible management entity and some of the other items on the agenda here. But I agree with you, Fred. We don't want to beat this to death. So if we could schedule a meeting in a week, with any luck, we'd be able to meet with the town administrator and also have her input on this as well. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I see Fred. Yep. Okay. So looking at calendar, you want to shoot for next Wednesday?
Isn't there something big going on in Washington, D.C. that day?
Perfect day to do it then, right? Nobody will be, no, just kidding.
Yeah, there's a coup d'etat schedule that I believe.
Do you want to shoot for the 18th instead? Thursday, the 18th?
Thursday, the 18th is better for me.
Thursday, are we in February?
Yeah,
Where are you?
January,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Monday, the 18th. That's Martin Luther King
I
Day.
am sorry.
Thursday, the 21st.
The 21st.
What month are you in?
Yeah, I was in February. You caught that, Hillary.
Okay, Monday the 21st is good. We had Monday
Thursday.
the 21st at
Thursday.
11.
Thursday, the 21st.
scheduled with Maria, but like I said, I got a meeting cancellation, so I don't know what that means.
Actually,
Yes.
I can't do the 21st. I just realized I'm in a hearing, testifying in a state hearing that day.
Okay.
About the
Okay.
19th, Tuesday, the 19th.
Yep, that works.
Tuesday, the 19th.
Tuesdays are good for me in the afternoon. That's the only thing.
Hillary?
Sure.
Tuesdays in the afternoon, I have a 1:30 and a 3 o'clock.
How long does the 1:30 last?
The 1:30 usually goes till about 2.
All right.
How about noontime on Tuesdays?
Works for me.
Yep, I can do that.
That's
I can
fine
do
for
that
me.
too.
Okay, so why don't we do 12 o'clock on Tuesday?
And do we know when the meeting with Maria is yet? Hillary, I'm sorry, you said something, but I don't remember
Well,
what you
that's what I'm trying to tell you is that I thought we had it
it got
scheduled for the
canceled. Yeah.
21st, but I'm looking at this email right now that says, what meeting date are you looking for?
Yeah.
That way I can get exactly what you're looking for, and you also want the selectmen's vote. So I guess why don't we select a date and give that to Rebecca for Maria? So do we want to try, do you want to try and see if we can get her at the wastewater meeting on that Tuesday at 12 o'clock?
That's what I was
Well-
thinking. Or earlier that day, I could do it if it's just you, Kurt, and I.
So we have the 10 o'clock emergency management team meeting, but why don't I see if we could get her for 12 o'clock?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's either, I would give her either that option, or we could try to meet with her between now and then. I mean, the main thing is to at least start to get her feedback, however we get it.
We should probably budget a couple hours, especially if she's going to be part of this. Just so everybody's, I would think.
Hillary's got a hard stop at 1:30.
Oh, that's right.
But that's okay. I can jump off and you guys can stay on. I mean, it's, you know.
Okay. Hillary, while we got you here, what are your thoughts on the next Board of Health meeting? Because this is obviously related.
So we're meeting today and I can ask them how soon they want to move forward.
Okay.
So I'll get back to you.
Okay, fine.
Great. Anything else?
Hey, Scott, could I ask you to forward your slides to me so I could study them?
Sure. Happy to do that. Hillary has them. Hillary, I don't know if you,
Yeah,
I'll
if you
send
just
them
want to send them out to the committee, Hillary, that'd be great.
Yeah. All right. I'm sending this off to, yes,
Thanks.
sure thing.
Hi, me too, please.
Well, now you
Sure.
might be getting too pushy unless you tell us what you're baking in that apron.
I am attentive, not pushy. Making bread and doing the dishes, guys. You know, I had a 4-hour select board meeting last night, and I've got a meeting at the FinCom tonight. So, you know, I looked at every word. I have a question though. Did I lose track of something? What do you mean you need a vote from the select board?
No, that I had asked Rebecca to tell me the date you guys voted on supporting option 3, and
Yeah,
she
we
just
did
blended
that.
it into one.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey,
Because
Ryan.
I'm gonna say, we've done that, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You have. Thank you very much for that.
Hey, Kurt, if Ryan is still on here, Kurt, Ryan, would you did a great slideshow for the Concom on these bulkhead PRBs. Would you be willing to share that with this committee?
And
Send that around?
yeah, I'll send it around.
Yeah.
Did everybody get the paper too, or should I send that as well?
I have not shared. You talking about the Long Island publication?
No, the basically the summary on the bulkheads.
Oh, no, I don't think they have. So why don't you share that as well?
All right, yeah, and they're already on file with the town clerk as well. So
Yeah,
Thanks, Ryan.
I really got it.
Is that a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Fred. We've been
Motion
waiting for
to
that.
adjourn.
All those in favor? We're adjourned at 11:05. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.